Okay, so this PowerPoint is looking today at how we might approach an essay question at IGCSE level, asking us to consider how a particular character is represented in the text that we're studying. It is planned that it will be another of the sort of 10-minute plans that I have put on the YouTube channel and my blog in recent times. And the idea is that it's a format, therefore, that any student studying the texts of any text can follow in response to a question such as this. Now, we're going to look at one particular character and one particular text in a moment, but before we do that, let's just think about how we approach any character question. First of all, we're in an exam, but so what? We've got to plan. There's no point trying to write an essay in an exam without a plan, even a limited 2 or 3 minute plan if you're pushed for time, but ideally between 5 and 10 minutes seems about right. The next thing to remember is that if you're answering a character question, for that question to have any purpose at all, there is a focus ideally on the way the character develops, any changes, any way in which the character alters from beginning of text to end of text. That might be the first question we need to ask ourselves. The second question would be whether there are any obvious moments in the text where we see that change beginning to happen. Remember, it might not be a straight line. We're going to look at Much Ado About Nothing in a moment, and whereas Benedick, who I'm going to use as my model, to all intents and purposes develops in a relatively straight line from arrogant, sort of sexual predator, man about town, bachelor to serious, more adult figure who is prepared to fight, potentially to the death, to protect the honour of a woman and then marries. That happens in a fairly straight line. Claudio, of course, goes in a slightly different path. He starts as this young, romantic lover, becomes a much more arrogant and self-centred figure through Act 2, Act 3, before Act 4, shaming hero, falling right, if you like, to the bottom of that level, and then climbing back up again. His path is rather different to Benedick's in that regard. The final question that we would want to probably ask as we begin to plan about this is, where does our text information come from? Who are the characters that are giving us this information that we're reading? Who are the characters that are our sources of information? So, with that in our mind, our plan will basically start here and hopefully last about 10 minutes. We'll consider the first question, and we'll look at Benedick as our character. And so we're wondering where his path goes, and I think here there's a fairly straightforward path here. He goes from being an arrogant misogynist to being a caring husband, and via this he begins to recognise the need to support Beatrice, and he's prepared to leave behind his youthful misdemeanours. He's prepared to leave behind his relationship with Don Pedro and his friends, because he knows that there is something better and something worth having at the end. In terms of question 2, we might look at the staging posts, and we would look at the fact that in Act 1, Scene 1, he is very definitely this arrogant young man trying to impose his views of bachelorhood and so on Claudio, and indeed on anybody that will listen. In Act 2, Scene 1, we probably see him being hurt and insulted when Beatrice is rude to him at the masked ball, calling him the prince's jester. That might be a moment of development. It leads to him being tricked in the garden, and remember, the reason that he begins to believe the tricking is A, that Leonardo is involved, but B, he can begin to recognise the arrogance that they are accusing him of in himself. Because of the gulling in the garden, he's not involved in Don John's plot to bring Hero down. Therefore, he is surprised at the wedding and is separated from John, Pedro and Claudio before declaring his love, still in 4-1, and being put to the test by being asked to kill Claudio. This is probably the most significant moment in the play for Benedick in terms of character development. And then eventually in Act 5, Scene 4, he marries Then he makes a public declaration of his love and a public rejection, if you like, of everything that he has held up to this time. Bearing in mind that you only have 45 minutes or so to answer a question in an exam, this is more than enough, I think, that you'll need. Who are we getting our information from? Well, at one scene one, we get most of it from Beatrice, but then we move to what he says about bachelorhood himself. We notice that we get a lot of information about him from Beatrice before he even appears on stage, and so we're sort of weighted against him as an audience. In Act 2, Scene 1, this process is continued, and we find evidence coming from Beatrice and Pedro. Before, in Act 3, Scene 2, he appears in front of his friends, a changed man, shaved and smelling of perfume and wearing makeup. And we hear, therefore, from himself what's happening. 4-1, very definitely, he begins to work for himself. His own actions, his own words convey the shift in his character. 5-1, when he challenges Claudio, the same. He's now not being portrayed to us via somebody else. He is his own man. And finally, by the time we get to the end of the play, this is entirely where the information is coming from. It's not coming from other people talking about him. It's coming directly from him. So we could argue that we see a character shift in that we're not having to rely on what people say about him. We can see it in his own behaviour. So if you're now preparing to write your essay, you're in the exam, you need some quotations. We've still got about 5 minutes left of our 10 minutes. And so we know the various key things that are said about him. We will pick up immediately in Act 1, Scene 1, Signor Montando, and we might pick up the fact that Beatrice twists the messenger's words to call him a good soldier to a lady. She also accuses him of being a valiant trencherman. This oxymoron of being a valiant glutton, I think, is rather fun. There's something else we can play on there. Later, at the end of their skirmish of wit, she tells him that he always ends, you always end, with a jade's trick, this idea again of him being somebody who will back out of fighting, who will always seek to be on top. Now, the next few on this slide I've put the other way round, because actually it's time that the class I want to teach this with do some work, if you see what I mean. So again, we'll look for Don Pedro's comments in 2-1, and Beatrice's comments in which he is compared with Don John. We'll look at Beatrice's comments again in terms of making him out to be a hired fool, and any other comments that they can find at this point, if only to make sure that we haven't just got an essay based on the first scene of the play. In his own words, the same process takes place in the sense that in his own words, we have a situation where he's very clear that he's loved of all women, only you accepted, yet he loves none, and we might begin to think what he means therefore by love. He's no doubt very happy to have a sexual relationship, but whether he loves them, something slightly different. The idea that he has been misused beyond the endurance of a block, the idea that she speaks poniards and every word stabs, suggesting that he's a much more sensitive man than he perhaps would like to admit. He dresses up his hurt feelings in these metaphors, but it suggests that there's a lot more sensitivity there. We look at why he believes the plot. We look at why he's embarrassed, and how he behaves in Act 3, Scene 2, when he comes in and, well, he makes an excuse, which you can find. I want people to find the moment he expresses his love for Beatrice, a key moment in the play, where he finally admits it, before having to back down. And then possibly that final moment before the end of the play, the moment that he accepts the challenge, and a beautiful little tricolon of, it is enough, I am engaged, I will challenge him. This idea of sudden seriousness, sudden gravitas appearing in Benedick in a way that has never appeared before. Ideally, 2 or 3 minutes left, you might have 2 or 3 other descriptors floating around from other characters, the way the messenger describes him in 1-1. What does Pedro say of him? What does Claudio say of him? And we might have a palette that we can begin to put together to write our essay. And in our last 2 or 3 minutes of planning, we note what we have. We have tracked the development. We've looked at this from the point of view of how does the character change, not telling the story. We've also noted some key quotations. So we have, in terms of writing an essay, a paragraph or a series of paragraphs which give us point, i.e. the character change, evidence, the quotations that we've found and we've remembered, some discussion of language, analysis of the language in terms of those, and a reflection on whatever is happening at the time. In other words, we put them into context of the play and we show that they make sense. If we have this, then we begin to have a good essay. And I've got a couple of examples of the way you might choose to write your paragraphs. First of all, we make a point. Benedick is first presented as an arrogant ladies' man. Well, there we go. It's a clear statement of the way the character is presented at the very beginning of the play. The impression is given clearly when Beatrice interrupts the messenger. Incidentally, they're just showing that we're aware of how this scene works, that Beatrice is unusual because she's interrupting, but this is not an essay about Beatrice, so we don't dwell on it. The messenger and Leonato to ask whether Signor Montanto, quote, has returned from the wars. We don't need any more than that. We don't need the whole line. Signor Montanto is the interesting bit. We need to analyse it. Her use of a sexual innuendo and the choice of a violent upward thrust in fencing as her nickname for Benedick, clearly showing that we understand not only the text, but we understand the subtext, the reason for the name, immediately labels him as a confident sexual predator, this idea that he is known as Sir Thruster, or whatever we might say, were this English. A very simple paragraph, not packed with detail, but quite enough to show that we're aware how the beginning of the play portrays Benedick. At the end of the play, rather at the end, the key moment perhaps, later in our essay, I might want to draw attention to this point. The crucial turning point in his character comes in Act 4, Scene 1. I'm being precise about where it comes because I want to show that I know the play. When he accepts Beatrice's command to kill Claudio. After his initial refusal, notice again that I'm making it very clear that I understand the plot but not dwelling on it. His short sentences, enough, I am engaged, I will challenge him, change the tone of the scene to one of serious import as his last vestiges of youthful humour fall away to reveal an adult focused on protecting the honour of a wronged lady. Now, I might have added to that it's a triplet of short sentences. I might point out that each of the short sentences gets slightly longer or slightly weightier, thus creating anaphora. But again, what I've given you here is a basic outline of the way a paragraph can do its job in a simple and straightforward manner. Now, this has taken, as a whole screencast, something like 14 minutes. The planning did take around 10. And it's now your turn. If you're watching this and you're preparing for exams at any level, whether you're year 11, year 10, you need to think about the main characters in your set texts in this way. In an exam, try to plan quickly. Try to identify the hinge point that there is a change, the point that after which the character can never return to where it was. And remember, if you have no quotations, you will get few marks. But having a quotation is not the same as having a useful quotation that you can genuinely use to support your point. Think carefully, focus on your key quotations, and use them wisely. Very best of luck.